Atlantis. Story of this mythical island has been fascinating mankind for over 23 centuries now. But even after all this time, we are no closer to unraveling its secrets and proving, or for that matter disproving, its existence. Could it be, however, that the answers we have been searching for are within our reach, hiding perhaps in plain sight? Oldest and quite possibly only reliable currently known written record of the legend comes from Plato, great Athenian philosopher, and without a question, one of the greatest known to man. Story is lightly touched upon in dialogue Timaeus, and is continued in Critias. This dialogue was either unfinished, or part of it was lost. There are some indications that Plato meant to continue and further advance his narration in a third dialogue, Hermocrates. This last dialogue was however never found, and in all probability was never even written. I must admit, when I first read the dialogues, I was leaning towards opinion that Atlantis is indeed literary invention, that it is a fiction intended to outline social and political ideals of aging philosopher. However, on a second and third read, as I skipped all the metaphysics in text and focused solely on the legend itself, I began to notice certain details and pieces of information that, according to our knowledge, should not be available to Plato in his time. Now, many studies have tried to identify Atlantis as America or locate lost cities somewhere on this continent. Basis for these conclusions is the indication given by Plato that the sunken continent was located behind Pillars of Heracles. For those unfamiliar with the term, it is ancient Greek name for Straits of Gibraltar. Based on this indication, some are even trying to locate lost island in Mediterranean Sea, arguing that Plato doesn't specify from which side of the straits this instruction behind should be taken. Both claims are wrong, however. Plato gives in his narration description of Mediterranean, and more significantly, he also describes America.
This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to the other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the Straits of Heracles, is only a harbor, having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent.
So if we look at the map of Atlantic and take this narration, what places can we identify? We are informed by Plato that Atlantis lies in Atlantic Ocean, in front of Pillars of Heracles. And he speaks of Mediterranean. This sea, within Pillars of Heracles, is but an harbor, having the narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, a through ocean. Really, if you look at the map, Mediterranean Sea is but an harbor to an Atlantic Ocean, behind the Straits of Gibraltar. It is a clear description of Mediterranean, and I don't see how these words could be interpreted any differently. So we have a harbor within the Straits of Heracles, that is today known as Mediterranean Sea, and we have a real sea, a through ocean, which Plato names Atlantic Ocean, in honor of this doomed continent which once lied within it. And he continues, from Atlantis you could get to the other islands, and from these you could get to this opposite continent. Argument can be made that he doesn't speak of America but simply of some larger island in Atlantic. For those skeptics, Plato gives an attribute that unmistakably belongs to America. This real sea, which we determine as Atlantic Ocean, is in fact surrounded by this what most truly can be called a boundless continent. And if you look at the map again, America indeed encompasses whole of Atlantic. It also spreads from north to south, almost across entire globe. In that respect, we can call it endless or boundless continent. These are very clear descriptions that fit perfectly on a modern map and should be impossible to misread. Therefore, I think we can agree on what I said earlier. Plato in fact describes clearly Mediterranean, Atlantis located in Atlantic Ocean, and last but not least, America. This is actually part of the narration that turned me around to take the story seriously. This point is actually groundbreaking on its own. Why, you ask? Well, let's do some math. Plato lived between 428 and 348 BC. Dialogues are dated 360 BC. 1492 is the year Columbus officially discovered America. Vikings are said to land in North America on the break of the first and second millennia. In conclusion, Plato has a knowledge of a new world some 1800 years before it is officially discovered, some 1300 years before it is stumbled upon by northerners. And it still gets better. According to his own words, story originated in Egypt. It was actually Egyptian priest who narrated these mythical events to Greek philosopher. Would it then be possible that the ancient civilizations like Egyptians or Sumerians knew of the continent on the other side of Atlantic? There were several attempts made by modern scientists to prove that it was possible for ancient cultures on both sides of Atlantic to know of each other's existence. Successful attempts were made to cross the ocean in ancient Egyptian reed boat, the kind of boat made out of the reed, intended for the transport on the river Nile. Objective of these attempts was to prove that even such a feeble raft could have made a journey across the ocean. But in spite all of these experiments, we were always lacking written admission of pre-Columbian Europe acknowledging new continent. Although it would seem now that this admission was hiding in plain sight all along, given to us by Plato himself. Now my second point might be a bit controversial. Story says that Atlantic Empire was far-reaching and ever-growing, stretching in Europe as far as Therania, which was a region in Italy, and in Africa as far as Egypt.
The men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia.
Its advance was stopped, however, by another superpower. This culture dwelled on Balkan Peninsula, and it is said to be genetic ancestor of Plato's Hellenes. However, it is also a cultural ancestor of Egyptian civilization.
In the Egyptian delta, at the head of which the Nile River divides, there is a certain district which is called the district of Sais, and the great city of the district is also called Sais, and is the city from which King Amasis came. The citizens have a deity for their foundress. She is called, in the Egyptian tongue, Neith, and is asserted by them to be the same whom the Hellenes call Athene. She founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus the seed of your race, and afterwards she founded ours, of which the constitution is recorded in our sacred registers to be 8,000 years old.
Just to avoid any confusion, in this passage it is actually Egyptian priest talking to Plato about how goddess Athene founded our Balkan civilization, and then 1,000 years later, Egyptian civilization. Now, best known and most recognized symbol of Egypt is a pyramid, and as it turns out, we can find pyramids on Balkan as well. They might also be the biggest in the world. They are located in Bosnia, in the village Visoko near Bosnian capital Sarajevo. As it happens, they are buried underneath a thick cover of soil. cover that is thought to be a remnant of ancient flood and is dated by scientists to be around 12,000 years old, give or take. These discoveries coincide with our story perfectly, as Plato insists at several places in his dialogues that both Atlantis and this Balkan civilization has been destroyed in a cataclysmic flood some 11,000 years ago.
But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis, in like manner, disappeared in the depths of the sea.
I will get to the reason behind this flood and sinking of Atlantis later on. Here I just want to note that there has been a few attempts to write these discoveries in Bosnia off as a hoax. Although I have not visited the site personally, and therefore can't make 100% fully informed decision, I consider these findings to be genuine. If nothing else, it just seems implausible to me that there would be hundreds or thousands of volunteers every year, many of which are students of archaeology or related sciences, and none of them would admit or even figure out that this was actually a hoax. Now finally to the big questions. Where was Atlantis? And can we find some remnants of it today? According to text, one extremity of the island was facing region of Gades, or Gadeira. This is a region in Spain, around good old Gibraltar.
To his twin brother, who was born after him and obtained as his lot the extremity of the island towards the Pillars of Heracles, facing the country which is now called the region of Gades in that part of the world, he gave the name which in the Hellenic language is Eumelus, in the language of the country which is named after him, Gadeirus.
Island is said to be lofty, with a huge mountains, and surrounded by these mountains, in the center of the island, but facing south, is a large and oblong plain.
The whole country was said by him to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea, but the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain, itself surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. It was smooth and even, and of an oblong shape, extending in one direction 3,000 stadia, but across the center inland it was 2,000 stadia. This part of the island looked towards the south, and was sheltered from the north.
So Plato gives us some directions to go on, and some dimensions to look for. Just to repeat and translate, plain has 3,000 stadia across in one direction, which would be 555 kilometers in today's measurements, and it has 2,000 stadia from center of the island towards south, which would be 370 kilometers. Let's look at a map of Atlantic and see if we can find something fitting this description. So there we have a Gibraltar, and around it is Gadeira. Now narration says one extremity of Atlantis is to face this area. And if we make the straight line from here into Atlantic, we will hit a shape, a silhouette, that indeed, if it was above the water, would be considered an extremity of the land. Now second attribute our sunken land should have is a large and oblong plain that is surrounded by mountains. And again, not far from our extremity there, we have a shape that, if above the water, would be a nice rectangular plane. Let's check its dimensions. It should be 555 kilometers in one direction, and from middle of the island toward the south, it's supposed to be 370 kilometers. And if we measure this area, we will learn that it stretches in those directions exactly the described distances. 555 kilometers from west to east and 370 kilometers from center to south. So we have our extremity, we have our plain, and we have mountains that surround it. I would say that we found our lost island. There has been a lot of speculation in the past that Azores Island might be somehow associated with Atlantis. In conclusion, these speculations seem correct now. However, in those ancient times, these islands would be nothing more than tops of the mountains, or in these cases, volcanoes. So what actually happened to this mythical land, and why did it disappear? Answer is relatively simple. Some of you might be aware of the fact that Himalayas are growing every year by some margin. This is due to the fact that they are situated over and created by two tectonic plates pushing against each other. This is causing them to rise bit by bit over the time. Now if you look closely on a tectonic map, you will realize that Atlantis was situated on intersection of not two, but three tectonic plates. And when you look at the direction of these plates, you will also notice that they are not pushing against each other, like Indian and Eurasian plate under the Himalayas, but rather getting away from each other. Therefore, Atlantis literally fell apart. Plates that formed it simply slide off each other, and it just disappeared under the sea. As for the capital city, you know, the concentric circles of land and water, temple of Poseidon in the middle, walls of buildings coated in orichalcum, that one. It is said to be on the plain in the middle of the island, some 10 kilometers from coast, or more precisely 50 stadia from coast. So my guess is it was somewhere here, in this area. Now there's very little hope that it survived intact, but given that it's some 250 or 300 kilometers from the closest fold, that the buildings were sturdy and made out of the stone coated with metal, given that we don't know how exactly did the sinking unfold, and that the entire city was a circle of 20 kilometers in diameter, I would say that there is a chance, maybe a very small chance, but still a chance, that one day we will discover some remnants of it.